Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the real housing crisis in the lower mainland of Vancouver, and that's the rental supply crunch. I'm going to talk about how rental rates are raised each year. I'm going to talk about what the effect is and why this is happening, why we have low supply versus the demand, and what I expect it's going to do for real estate prices moving forward in the future. If this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hasan. I'm a real estate agent in Vancouver. I make these educational videos to help you in your buying or selling journey. Without wasting any time, let's get rolling. So if you've been following my channel for a bit or you've been watching the news, you will have heard that the real estate market sales-wise is softening and it's leveling out into a balanced market. We spent the good part of 2 years in a seller's market, and now finally we're seeing prices stabilize, drop in some areas, and we're seeing more competition between buyers and sellers versus a market that was heavily favored towards sellers. Now, while this is all going on, there's one portion of the housing market that has not seen any sort of significant drop, and in fact it's seen increases steadily all through this year and parts of last. I don't need to tell a lot of you this, but that is the rental market. In terms of rental rates, if you're a tenant right now or you're a landlord, Vancouver is now number one in Canada for the highest rental rates. One bedrooms on average are averaging around $2,350, $2,400 per month. Two bedrooms on average are at about $3,300 per month. Keep in mind, this is for Vancouver in its entirety, so this is not solely for the west side or for downtown, where you might expect there to be higher rental rates. The rates actually go higher in those areas. This is for the entirety of Vancouver, including South Vancouver, including River District. So needless to say, rental rates have increased significantly. So to give you an idea of how rental rates are increased every year, there's actually been some changes in how this has been calculated. Several years ago, it used to be that you were able to raise rental rates by inflation plus 2%. And then I believe it was 2018 where the government came out and took off that additional 2%. So they tied it directly to inflation. What happened during COVID, a lot of you will know, or perhaps you're a tenant yourself and you didn't have your rent raised. There was a rental rate freeze, so landlords weren't allowed to raise any rates during COVID. And then for the last year, so for 2022, the amount has been 1.5%. The reason that rental rates are such a hot topic right now is there's a lot of questions in terms of how it's going to look for next year. If you followed my channel, we've talked a lot about inflation and how inflation is at record levels. And if rental rate increases are tied to inflation, what is that going to look like for next year? So as it stands right now, from the past 12 months, the inflation rate is roughly about 4%. It's probably a little higher now. And by the time they calculate the rate of inflation, it'll probably be higher than that as well. So there's a lot of talk now between, the BC provincial government and then also Landlord BC, which protects the rights of landlords. It's an association that looks out for the landlords in terms of what is this going to look like. The last time we had a raise of 4 or 4.5%, I believe that was in 2019. Again, we had a freeze after that. So it's expected for sure that there's going to be a max allowable rental increase much higher than we've seen in several years. What exactly that's going to look like is up in the air. The government is saying that they need to put some level of a control in terms of how high they're willing to go for the rental increase, whereas Landlord BC is saying, well, the effects of inflation are affecting everyone. That includes landlords as well. The cost of owning these rental properties goes up, so basically what they're saying is that the rental rate should be able to go up at least the amount of inflation and potentially more than that to be able to cover and offset. Now, I posted a video on TikTok the other day talking about this, and it had some of the most engagement out of any video on my channel. And the reason I mention it is this is clearly a hot button topic, and it's almost like there's a battle between tenants and landlords. So I just want to, quickly mention that, there can be a lot of, for lack of a better word, hatred thrown towards landlords. I will say this, landlords, they are a critical piece to the housing ecosystem. We need landlords. And the reason for that is even if everyone had the means to purchase real estate, buying real estate doesn't make sense for everyone, and this is coming from a realtor, there is always going to be a segment of the population, whether they are traveling for work, whether they prefer to live in a certain area for a few months and perhaps move to another country, if they're in a transitional phase in their life, even if they have the means to purchase real estate, they're not going to do it. So there is a market, of course, for rental housing. There always needs to be rental housing. And it's not as if we didn't have these landlords in place that prices would come down significantly and everyone would be able to buy. So the next question is, what are the different types of landlords out there? So obviously we have the smaller landlord that has, maybe 1 to 3 units. And then we have the larger corporations, investment groups, hedge funds that own hundreds and sometimes thousands of rental units locally or across the country. Now, in my opinion, it's very important to protect that smaller landlord. They're more likely to feel the effects of inflation. And the reason I say this is because, look, the rental market, it's not a competitive market. It doesn't err in favor of tenants, but the smaller landlord is more likely to rent their unit at a lower rate because they can't afford to have their unit sit vacant for a period of time. They have these additional costs that they need to carry. It's tougher for them to carry these holding costs, and they have to compete with the neighboring property that's also looking for a tenant. It brings competition to the rental market. If we don't look out for kind of this smaller investor or this smaller landlord, if they get pushed out, the trickle-down effect is that these larger investors now own more of the rental inventory, and we can see what happens in those scenarios. For example, there was a large builder in Port Moody that was renting out 3 bedrooms, albeit they were furnished 3 bedrooms, but asking $6,000 per month because they carried so much of the inventory in Port Moody for 3-bedroom rentals. So the last thing the rental market needs essentially is for these larger groups, organizations, etc., to be holding more inventory. I think back personally to, I come from the telecom industry. Before I worked in real estate, I spent over a decade working for one of Canada's big 3 telecom providers. So in Canada, it's an oligopoly. There's a few large players. They're called the big 3. And basically they provided majority of the telecommunication services across the country. At any given point, it was really tough to determine which company was winning or which company was the best. But one thing I can tell you is that this oligopoly type of a format, it never worked well, or it never really benefited the consumer. So for tenants, it's very important to have many landlords out there versus large organizations that hold all the inventory, because it does bring some level of competition to the market. So we've talked about rental rate increases. We've talked about the different types of landlords. What is causing this sort of issue in our market? So rather than beat a dead horse, which is the supply issue, the city of Vancouver has added on staff now to be able to push through development applications quicker, possibly a little too late for that, but at least it's a step in the right direction. What's causing this influx? We've talked on my channel several times about immigration, how that is up, and how the Liberal government's plans are for increased immigration throughout this year and into next year as well. One thing I can tell you in terms of students, international students that are coming to Canada, in 2020, I believe the number was somewhere around 60,000 for the full year in terms of international students coming to Canada. Right now, we sit January to April, we sit at somewhere around 140,000. We still have a September semester still to come. So international student admissions is sky high, if you will, and that is tied to immigration. The other thing, and this is anecdotal, but speaking with a lot of my colleagues who work with a lot of international clients, what they've kind of told me is that the pandemic was an eye-opener for a lot of people in other countries. What I mean by that is everyone, and including us in Canada, everyone was kind of looking at how our governments were handling the pandemic, how they were treating us through it, lockdowns, etc. And from what I'm hearing, a lot of confidence was lost in certain countries overseas. And the sentiment or the thought amongst these residents is when the opportunity arises for them to immigrate to another country that may have handled it differently. And look, I'm not going to get into it whether Canada did it right or did it wrong. All I'm going to say is that there are people in other countries that were extremely unhappy with the way that they were locked down and the way they were treated, and they feel, unsafe moving forward in their own country, and they're looking for that opportunity to migrate to a different country. So again, that's anecdotal. I don't have anything on paper, but again, speaking to my colleagues, speaking at people in the industry that have a lot of international connections, that is the sentiment. So I really think that immigration especially is going to be a driver. And you might think, okay, they are likely to come here and purchase real estate. Having said that, a lot of immigrants will come here and they'll rent for a year or two while they figure out exactly where they're going to be, where they're going to need to stay. So this obviously puts a strain on rental supply. And then furthermore, in terms of real estate prices, when we talk about sales, it's going to have an effect on that. It's going to increase prices as well. Right now, we're in a bit of a stalemate between buyers and sellers. I'll link to a video that I just did that kind of speaks about that, so I won't get too far into it, but it is, in my opinion, an opportune time if you are a first-time buyer, you're considering getting into the market. I expect July and August to be two of the slowest months we've seen in several years. When I say slow, that's indication that it's a good time for buyers to investigate and take a look and see if it makes sense for them to get into the market at that time. So there you have it, guys. I hope I gave you some information in regards to the rental market, what rental rates might look like next year, and why we're kind of seeing this supply crunch and this excess demand. Now, if you learned anything from this video, I'd love it if you could hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. What it does is it takes this video and it sends it out to more people that it can possibly help. If you need any real estate help in the Vancouver area or the Fraser Valley, I'd love to help you out. All my contact information is below in the description. But outside of that, thank you for taking the time to watch, and have a wonderful day.